On this episode of Still Loading, embrace your spiky-haired wet dreams. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and on this episode, we are doing a patron poll topic. So, I guess to address a bit of an elephant in the room, or maybe people don't know, so I'm creating an elephant right now, but this is actually a Patreon poll topic that is not, there was one that was supposed to occur before this, Epic Mickey, but due to the SAG-AFTRA strike, I held off on recording, plus my guest was super busy at the time. So this episode is actually coming out before the Epic Mickey episode, even though my patrons voted on this after the Epic Mickey poll was well done and closed and the episode should have been released. So there will be an Epic Mickey episode still, but for now, we are covering Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII. And joining me today, the biggest Final Fantasy VII fan I know, Kolby from the Switch It Up podcast. Kolby, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great, Josh. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on. Hello to all the patrons out there. It's been a while for me on the podcasting front, but couldn't be happier to be on.
Dude, I've been meaning to have you on for a while. You are a huge Final Fantasy VII fan, and I couldn't think of anyone better to join me on this episode. So I'm very happy to finally have you on. It's been a long time coming. So before we dive into this in earnest, we always, of course, like to give a little bit of a preamble, a little bit of context to our experiences on all this. And I'm actually going to go first only because I think you have a much more interesting one than I do. So instead of having everything start off amazing and then me completely, killing the momentum with a boring story, my own story is that I got this game shortly after it came out back in 2008, which actually it's funny. I guess for context real quick as well, it came out in Japan on September 13th, 2007, so 16 years ago, but the North American release date was March 25th, 2008. So it is still in its 15-year anniversary. Well, actually, when this episode comes out, it'll be in 2024, so we're in this it's still it's close enough. 15 years, damn it. So I got this shortly after it came out though, and I got pretty far into it. I actually got up to Nibelheim, which is arguably over 3/4 of the way through the game, just about 3/4, and then for some reason I couldn't figure out where to go next. I thought I had explored everything. I was speaking to everyone. I'm pretty sure the game glitched on me because I had to, I was in Nibelheim and I spoke with Sephiroth, and this doesn't spoil anything. Listeners should know Sephiroth. He's one of the main characters in the game. He starts up from the beginning, but I would speak to him and the next scene would still not progress. And I don't remember exactly what I was supposed to do. In fact, I don't even know what's on that save file because I can't find it anymore. So I had to start fresh. And, once the patrons voted on this and I got to finally play this, I played it all the way through for the show during my lunch breaks at work, which honestly, now that this is over, it's kind of bittersweet because I really did enjoy my time. I looked forward to my lunch break every day at work because I would get to play a little bit more of Crisis Core. I beat this on my lunch break at work earlier this week that we're recording this. So I'm kind of sad that it's over, but that was my experience with Crisis Core. I got it shortly after it came out when it was contemporary. Didn't really get to play through it, or I tried to, didn't get very far because I got stuck, and then beat it. Here we are 15 years later, finally beat it. So Kolby, I want to throw it over to you because not only do you have a little bit different experience than I do with this game, you also have a very much different perspective than I do on Final Fantasy VII because listeners, Kolby, like most people who grew up with Final Fantasy VII, like myself, are in their mid-30s. We're old-ass fucking millennials desperately trying to cling to our childhood. Kolby here is much younger than I am. You're in your early 20s. And so you came to Final Fantasy VII without the rose-colored glasses, without the nostalgia. And that's what I find so interesting about your experience with the series, is because a lot of times as you get older, and this goes for everyone, this isn't even just like millennial or Gen X or whatever fucking generation you want to attribute to. As you get older, you look back on the stuff of your childhood with rose-colored glasses, and sometimes you don't always. It's harder for you to acknowledge the flaws and the issues with some of the things you grew up with. Donkey Kong 64 is one of my favorite games of all time. That game is flawed as hell, but I will never admit it because I love that game. Rose-colored glasses totally color my view of that game. But you came to Final Fantasy VII without all that, without the rose-colored glasses. You kind of got into it of your own accord, without the nostalgia. So I after that long-winded preamble, I'm throwing it over to you, my friend. How did you get into Final Fantasy VII, and what's kind of your general experience with it? And then go into your experience with Crisis Core.
Yeah, man. Basically, during I think it was the 2020 Game Awards, so I remember they still had it, but it was the COVID pandemic, obviously, so no one was there. It was all virtual. That was when Sephiroth got introduced into Smash Brothers, and I remember thinking, that guy's really cool. Who is he? And I knew nothing of him. I'm not the biggest video game guy. Like, I like playing video games, but I wouldn't consider it like a passion or hobby, like crazy hobby of mine. But since I have touched a video game controller before, I knew what Final Fantasy VII was. It's just part of like the lingo that happens. So
yeah,
I knew Cloud. Like, I even knew that. Can I spoil the original FF7 from 1997? Like, is that cool?
You know what? It's a 30+ year game. I covered the game. Actually, is it 30 years? It's not at 30 years yet.
26,
I'm sorry. It'll be
27 years.
Yeah, it's over 25 though. In any case, spoilers for Final Fantasy VII. If you don't want to know anything about that game, just skip ahead. I don't know, like 30, 40 seconds.
So yeah, I knew Aerith didn't make it at the end of the day. I knew that big spoiler. It's one of the biggest spoilers in video game history, obviously. But yeah. Long story short, I was like, Sephiroth looks cool. Who is he? And then I kind of dug into it a little bit, and I found out that I didn't know remake was a thing that came out in 2020. And then when I found out that there's this remade version of this game people loves, I knew 7 had so many, like you said, fans that maybe looked at it a bit biasly from their childhood, but it was still overall a great game with an even bigger impact. I was like, okay, let's look into this a little bit, and I thought it was like the coolest thing like ever, from combat to visuals to story. I just thought it was a really well done game watching it on YouTube, so that's when I decided to get my PhD in FF7 lore. That since there's nothing better to do because there's a global pandemic, so I might as well get knowledged up a little bit. So yeah, ended up saving up money for a PS5, bought Remake last year, about almost 2 years ago. Saved up cash for 2 years, bought it in Stone Cold Cash, no big deal. And then played Remake. watched all the compilation stuff, for better or worse, Advent Children, even some before Crisis stuff, which was the mobile game, original Crisis Core, and then Dirge of Cerberus. Watched all those on YouTube. Got pretty familiar with the OG compilation. Then as Remake started, kind of like a new, starting again, like refreshing everything. That's when I found out more about Crisis Core, and then got into Reunion, obviously, which came out a little over a year ago by the time you're hearing this. So I have nothing but positive things to say about, well, not entirely true. As a video game, like the combat and like the combat and like actually playing the game, I have nothing but positive things to say about Reunion because that's the version I played. The PS4 or PSP, sorry, came out when I was 3 years old, so don't really have familiarity with the original Crisis Core other than watching on YouTube. But playing Reunion, I had a lot of fun with it. I have my gripes with it, as I'm sure you had your gripes with the original game, but that's basically my 2 cents on the whole situation, to keep a very long story short.
Well, that's why I was so happy to have you on, because I know, like you said, you did not play the original version of it. You played Reunion, the remake, and I only played the original. And I think I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't at least touch on the remake. And since I don't have a PS5, and I don't have Reunion, I couldn't do that. So we're kind of approaching this whole game from two different ends of the spectrum, which I think is going to create a much more well-rounded experience, or much more well-rounded, perspective for our audience when we discuss this. And so I'm grateful that, that you're coming at it from that perspective, because now I'll get a little bit of everything. It's going to be interesting. And you did actually go back and play the original Final Fantasy VII, though, correct? Like the original PS1 version eventually.
Yeah, so I've beaten it twice on Switch. I've done 2 playthroughs on Switch. One where I didn't get all the characters, and the other one I did like everything other than like beat the weapons. Like I did everything but beat every weapon.
I don't
basically.
blame you. I wouldn't even bother. Fuck that, dude. It is
so I spent about 60 hours in the original game. Yeah, Emerald Weapon's it's a tough scene for anybody. So, but I've spent about 60 hours in the original game, which I think that's pretty impressive given that it's 25 years old.
And we're just going to touch on this briefly, but I have to ask, how do you think it stacked up against the remake? And I obviously, the visuals, it's no contest. Remake is stunning. It is absolutely beautiful. But in terms of like how it presents the story and everything, and in terms of I understand the mechanics are different. Did you end up finding you still enjoyed the old FF7 mechanics? Mechanics, excuse me.
Original and remake are they're 2 different games that do 2 different things, I think, is how we have to look at it from this point. Because remakes, obviously, like it's a remake. It's not Final Fantasy VII remade. Like they're doing something new, which has been beaten to death 100 times for anybody that's talked about it. But I think FF7 original it still holds up. Like I love turn-based combat personally. I think it's my favorite. It's personally my favorite form of combat. Like I love a good turn-based game. And
okay.
I think FF7 the original flows well, and I think I love the characters and the story. Couple of like clunky things, like the whole Kate Sith arc is a little off. The game kind of it tries to do a lot at once. There's like 7 different plots going by the end of it, but it all but it has a nice finale and ending, which I think is ultimately what's remembered. And then remake, like I said, it's a different thing. It's a different game that's trying to do a different thing. And what it tries to accomplish, which is give players a new perspective and give players who play the original something new. I think he does a fantastic job of that. So I'm biased, obviously, because I love these characters and I love the story. But I think Rebirth's going to be incredible. I can't wait to play it. I've already pre-ordered it, and I think everything before that has its purpose too still. So I think there's something for everybody.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's very, like I said before, it's very interesting to me to see someone, and I hate having to bring up the age because I feel like people use age as a way to like to play down someone else's opinion just because they are either older or younger or something.
I'm a teacher, man.
You know what I mean?
Get it, trust me.
I fucking hate that. I hate, like, it doesn't fucking matter. You're allowed to have your opinions and takes on things regardless. So I really enjoyed hearing yours of just kind of how these stack up. So let's dive in. Of course. So let's dive into this game in earnest now. We are going to be talking about Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII. Like I said at the top, came out on September 13th, 2007 in Japan, and on March 25th, 2008 in North America. It did, of course, get released also in Australia and in Europe. It was on June 19th, 2008 in Australia, and June 20th, just a day later, in 2008 in Europe. The Reunion came out on December 13th, 2022, so just a little over a year ago by the time this episode drops. A couple fun facts that I looked up and just kind of doing some research. I looked up some old interviews back with the original, for the original PSP version of the game.
That's cool, because I have new stuff on Reunion that I can mention.
Perfect. I will send it over to you once I do some of my fun facts. That like I said, audience, we're tackling this from both angles. Is perfect. So they wanted to tell the Crisis Core story since Zack was such an oddly minor character in the original game for how much of a major role he plays in Cloud's story and the events leading up to the beginning of Final Fantasy VII. A lot of the other stuff I have, we'll talk about more when we get into the battle system. And I'm very curious if, like, Reunion, did they do they completely remake the battle system, or do they still use the DMW, the digital mind wave thing that appears in the original?
The digital mind wave is still in the game, but it's like it has a completely different mechanic. And have you ever played like a Xenoblade game?
No.
So so from what I can gather, again, I've never played the original Crisis Core. Crisis Core original is very much like a Xenoblade game, whereas Reunion's very much like Remake, like in terms of combat.
Okay. I'll have to take your word on it then. Let me see if there's anything else actually that would fit in here. Here we go. A hard mode was added for the European release, which did not appear in the original versions because they actually felt like the game was a little bit too easy. And in all honesty, I kind of agree. I didn't really have that much hard of a time of trying to beat this game. I barely did any of the side missions, which there are a lot of in the original. There is a metric buttload. There's so many, but I barely had to do any of them. And I think I was like level 30 when I beat the game or something like that.
Okay.
Some of the main characters in this game, the main characters of this game, obviously Zack, who is Zack Fair, who is he's the playable character. He's the character you're playing as. There's also the leader of the Turk Sung, and Cisne, one of the female operatives in the Turks. There is also, of course, your two soldier. They're probably your biggest supporting cast members, the two soldiers with you. Besides Sephiroth, there is Genesis and there is Angeal. And Genesis, believe it or not, his visual design was based off of a J-Rock star named Gact. G-A-C-K-T.
It's like my favorite fact. It's like my favorite fact ever.
Dude, I looked up pictures. I'm like, really? He's based off of a J-Rock star. And then I looked it up. I'm like, I can see it, like with the face, but like the hair is nothing like it, the rest of it. It was so hard for me to like really tell. But he had a very big hand in helping design the look and feel of Genesis once the Square Enix devs like kind of started working with him, which I thought was cool. And a lot of the game's story, I shouldn't say a lot of it, but like a lot of the attention to detail in this game was done in a response to negative feedback from the fans from the OAV Last Order, which I had no idea. I never even heard of Last Order. I've seen Advent Children, and I've dabbled in Dirge of Cerberus, but I never actually watched Last Order. I tried watching a bit of it for this, and I'll be honest, I saw the nitpicks, and maybe you can tell me what people were mad about in more greater detail, but the two things I noticed... I just kind of I read a plot summary because I didn't have time to watch the full thing in preparation for this. I skimmed through it a bit, and then I read the plot summary. I'm like, I don't see what the issue is. And it's because of two things that I could look up. One, that Tifa actually got to see Cloud there in person, which, to be fair, does ruin a large portion of the plot later in the original Final Fantasy VII game. And then there was there was like one other one. But to me, both of them, like the Tifa one, at least I can understand where they're coming from, but to me, it doesn't ruin it enough. I thought it was a little nitpicky, but that was just me. What do you know what people were mad about?
Well, yeah. So Last Order, for those who don't know, is, like you said, an OAV of the events of Nibelheim. It's basically an animation of the events of Nibelheim. It's like a half hour long, I think. There's a Japanese and English dub. You can watch them on YouTube if you're really interested. It got such a negative backlash that they've come out and said like it's not canon, like it's not actually like a part of the timeline. And you basically nailed it. Cloud being unmasked and Tifa seeing that he was actually there, I think takes away a lot of what the original 7 story anyway was all about, because that was like the whole Nibelheim instance, obviously huge, and Tifa, and that's a whole different thing. But and the other one was Sephiroth. Instead of him getting thrown into the live stream,
that's what it was.
Throws himself willingly into the live stream because he thinks he cannot beat, quote unquote, can't beat Cloud, which makes zero sense because Cloud's a vegetable at that point basically, and Sephiroth is Sephiroth. So I don't know. It's fun to watch just because now it's not canon and not official. I still think it's fun to watch just because I like FF7 stuff, and there's a lot of Zack, and I think we're going to talk about this, I'm sure, but Zack's like the biggest win from both versions of Crisis Core. So his likability as a character, so I think it's still fun. But yeah, that was the backlash on Last Order.
That's interesting because I understand the story implications for the Tifa thing. Everything else just like it just felt nitpicky. Even the Tifa thing, it felt honestly super nitpicky. But now the more I dwell on it, and the more like, especially when spoiler alerts for Final Fantasy VII, when Cloud has to reassemble his memory, it makes a little bit more sense that like why people were upset. But I don't know. I guess backlash is. I think people just blow shit out of proportion a little bit too much, and this it felt a little bit like that from what I read. But in any case, it was a bad idea. I agree with the criticism nonetheless.
Well,
but
it gets blown out, especially because 7 was trying to be its own thing with all the stuff they were doing with it. Like, it wasn't trying to be a Final Fantasy; it was trying to be like its own franchise, which it basically is at this point.
It pretty much, and it's funny actually. In doing research for this, I had no idea that there was a whole thing called like the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. It's a meta series.
That's what my PhD's in.
I understand, but this is all stuff that's after Final Fantasy VII, so I get that. So you have Before Crisis, which was the mobile phone game. What does that take? Do you play as the Turks in that?
Before Crisis is a mobile game that was the first piece of compilation that came out before Advent Children. So
it was only technically released in Japan. It never got a port over.
That never came to the States, although you can mod it. I'm pretty sure. You play as a Turk, and the events take place. I think they take place before Final Fantasy VII. I know that much because Zack's in it and Sephiroth's in it, but you can't play as them, obviously. And they're like,
that's pretty cool.
So it basically it blends into the Crisis Core story a little bit, which is cool. But
which would actually make sense.
That's on the timeline first, canonically, quote unquote.
Okay. And then obviously Advent Children takes place after Final Fantasy VII, which that's a whole nother can of worms we're not going to go into. We're not going to deal with geostigma.
What's your quick take on that?
I saw, you know what? I am not going to give it for this one reason. I have a great story of how I first saw that movie. And when I do a full episode eventually on that movie, I'll tell you off mic. How I first watched that movie. But I'm going to save it for the listeners for when I eventually do an episode with it.
Love it. All right.
But yeah. But okay, that makes a lot more sense. So with Crisis Core, it came out, like we said, in 2007 / 08 in North America. The game revolves around Zack, like we've said before, and with the other characters, the other soldier first classes, which at the beginning of the game, Zack is a second class soldier, and you do eventually work your way up to it. Genesis and Angeal are kind of like his, not his mentors. Angeal is definitely Zack's mentor, and that is a major part of the story throughout the game, is their relationship and what they mean to each other, which is pretty interesting. And then obviously Genesis is he's there, and he kind of becomes the main antagonist of the game for reasons we will get into in the story section. And Sephiroth is he's there kind of, he's a major part, but he's also not, he doesn't have the same major relation. Yeah, but they humanize him a lot more in this game than they ever.
Oh, he's great. He's great. I feel like he's great in this game. I really enjoy him in this game.
I agree. So before we get into the games, I want to throw it over to you quick, Kolby. Any fun facts that you were able to look up from Reunion's development or that kind of thing? Because I have a bunch of other stuff about the DMW, but we'll talk about them when we do the battle system.
Okay, so you've never played Reunion, which is... So you're not missing much, because literally the project just took the source code from the original game and put it into Unreal Engine 4, and that's basically how they made the game. So
okay.
Every line of dialogue is the same. Every story beat is the same. It is truly a remaster. It's not a remake like Remake was.
Okay.
It is truly just a remaster of the PSP game with a different combat system and a couple different twinks here and there. It's the same thing. So you're not missing anything by playing one version over the other. But yeah, for it being called Reunion and Remake versus Remaster, this is truly a remaster of the original game. This is still the prequel to original Final Fantasy VII. So you're just missing a more updated version of the game, and I think a more fun version of the game, personally, in Reunion. And I pulled a quote, actually, from it. So
go for it.
Tetsuya Nomura thinks Crisis Core's story has stood the test of time in that he doesn't find any faults in the story whatsoever, which I think we can be the judges of. But, I thought that was a very interesting quote coming from the Kingdom Hearts guy.
Considering someone who, no offense to Nomura, I would love to interview him somehow. I don't think he knows how to tell a story because there's so. I love how unnecessarily convoluted Kingdom Hearts is, but that is semi-ironic too. Like there is so much stuff in his games where, like I'll be honest, I've heard it before too with a friend of mine, Game Dave. The end of Remake with how they changed the story to FF7.
Oh yeah.
Not sure I like what they did with that. I have no issue with them doing like expanding other parts, like what they. This is not to go into a whole review of Remake, like what they did with Jesse.
I could give you. I could do a whole episode on this topic alone.
I will have to have you back on for that then. But Jesse, I loved how they expanded Jesse's role. Like I thought that was a really cool way to do it. It was a perfect way to take that one segment of Final Fantasy VII and turn it to a full like 50, 60, however many hour experience.
Giving the Turks some more agency.
Yes,
too was another good.
Yes,
addition, I think.
And so that's very interesting coming from him, the Kingdom Hearts guy, who. To what he says about story.
He said Crisis Core was a flaw. He basically said Crisis Core was a flawless story, which
I think that's kind of odd to say because it was a lot of this. The ending was already pre-written for him. You know, like and this game has a lot to do with like kind of like the prequels of the Star Wars movies, though I think it executes it much better. I'm not comparing the two, but like the Star Wars prequels always had the same endpoint. With spoiler alert for those, just in case, with Darth Vader. With this, it was always going to be the same endpoint, which major spoiler for this game, if you don't want to hear this quick, 5 seconds, because we will do a whole story thing at the end, but with Zack's death, like that was always going to be the endpoint.
That is the moment that starts Final Fantasy VII.
Exactly. So I think it's a little interesting I don't want to say odd, but maybe a little bit odd that he says that considering that the ending was already written. You already knew what the outcome was going to be, but maybe in some ways that's harder to do because then you don't have that creative freedom, but sometimes that limitation, I don't know. I like the ending though. I in general, I like this story throughout this game and I thought it was really well told. Some of the voice acting in the original was a little wonky. Do they keep the same voice actors in Reunion?
It was the remake cast with obviously they had to recast for Cisne but Gact is still in the Japanese version. They just used all of his old lines. He didn't record any new lines. They just took all of his original lines from the PSP game and put them in the Reunion Japanese version.
Oh, was he the voice of Genesis in the original?
Yes.
Oh my God, I didn't even know that. I feel so stupid. That makes sense. Why wouldn't he?
So yeah, they basically recasted everyone but him in the Japanese version. He's the only one that didn't get a new cast. And then the remake actors are all there for their characters in this game as well. Yeah. So Aerith has her remake actors, Zack has his, et cetera, et cetera.
It's funny. I also think that this game really is the first one that shows a lot of Nomura's handprints on it in terms of Final Fantasy. Like obviously he's been working on Final Fantasy games since a while. Like he worked on 7 originally. He also did stuff on 6. Like he's been with the series for a while. But this is the first one that I played, and I'm like, this feels like a Nomura Final Fantasy, for better or worse. I actually think it doesn't have a lot. He was
the creative director.
Yep.
So I mean,
but all right, let's get into the gameplay with this. Right, let's talk about the battle system. This has this thing called the DMW, also known as the Digital Mindwave System. This battle system I found super interesting. So in the original PSP version, they switched it up. Instead of a turn-based game, they went with a more action-based combat because since you're only controlling Zack, and the developers I think smartly did this, and that's why they said that so in the interview. Well, they didn't compliment themselves in the interview. I'm saying they're smart, but if you stuck with the typical turn-based combat system and you're only playing as one character, that's going to be boring as shit because you're just going to be waiting for the ATB to go up and you're just kind of sitting there waiting for you to make the next move. So I think it was smart they switched over to a more action-based combat system, which this was one of the first Final Fantasies to really do that. And I think it was pretty smart. And in all honesty, because I played Remake, I see Remake's combat DNA in this game. It's not the same by any stretch.
Yeah.
Like Remake is a lot more action focused. This, like when you hit attack, you still have to wait a little bit, like for him to make the move type of thing. But you can really feel the mechanics of what modern Final Fantasy action combat is like in this game, which I think is kind of cool to see the evolution of it from there.
Oh yeah, I completely agree with that. I never thought of it like that. How Crisis Core, because I don't consider Crisis Core a mainline Final Fantasy, but
yeah,
they took some ideas from a PSP game and were like, okay, what can we do with this? And then took it down the line further, because now you have games like 16 where it doesn't even try to hide it. It is an action game.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was necessarily like if when they were developing 16, they're like, let's look at Crisis Core and take it. It's just something that they made Crisis Core and they've iterated on that type of combat.
It gave them the idea of Final Fantasy being an action game.
And the way the combat works, at least in the PSP one, I want you to I'll throw it over to you because I want to hear how it kind of works in the Reunion, where you have like an action bar at the bottom that lets you choose to either attack, use whatever materia you have equipped to your action slots. You can use items, of course, from there as well. And as you progress through the game, you do get more action slots, but you max out on those pretty early. And then you cycle through those by hitting the R and L buttons on your PSP. So if you are currently set on the attack action, you can hit X to do it. Or if you want to go over to the one to the right of it, you hit R or L, or what I guess R because you're going to the right. And then you hit in whatever materia or move you have assigned to that slot, you'll perform when you hit X. So for me, I always did attack and then Cura right next to it because I want to be able to heal easily. I don't want to have to figure out which direction I want to hit R or L. So I kind of like that. It gives you a little bit of options. So if you want to focus on all-out attack, maybe you'll do like a power move as your second slot next to attack, or maybe some type of offensive magic in your second slot. And obviously the stuff you use less, you put down the line. But even then, it's not hard to access because if you remember where it's at, if it's like in the third slot, you just hit right twice. Or if you keep hitting in, say I have the attack command, which is the most far left command option. If you hit left, it'll jump to the other end of the line, if that makes sense. It'll kind of snake its way back. So if you're smart, you don't have to hit like I'm doing a poor job explaining this, but the attack command is the first one in the line, and the item command is the last one in the line, and there's like usually 4 in between. So instead of having to hit right on your PSP 4 times, the R button 4 times to get over to the item slot at the very end on the other side, you can just hit left once and it'll jump you to the other side. So that's the way the basic combat works. It can screw you over because if you mash the X button and sometimes you'll be locked into a command that you don't want because maybe an enemy attacked you in between, and so it attacked you in between your last attack and the next attack you're going to do. So they'll knock you on your ass and then he'll get up. You're like, oh shit, I'm almost at low health. I should heal. But you can't because you already inputted that attack command. So he's going to run over and try to smack somebody. So you better hope that you can get a heal in beforehand. So you do have to be a little strategic. You can't just button mash. So you can get away with it most times. So before I go into the DMW, what was it like with Reunion, Kolby? How close was it to that?
So the item bar is still there. It's in the bottom right, but the attack button's gone. It's strictly square to attack, or I played on the PS5. It could be different for other controllers, but for me it was square, and then Zack would do, if I remember correctly, when you hit attack, he did strictly like one attack. He would attack like down with his sword. Like he wouldn't do like a flurry, where if you like repeatedly hit square, he goes in like a combo, which is pretty cool. A lot like Cloud does in Remake. He fights a lot like Cloud does, unsurprisingly, to those who are, if you know, you know. So, but it's a lot more of an action game. You could, I don't remember if you could dodge in the original PSP version.
You could,
dodge attacks, but you can. So you have that still. You have block, and basically, it's a lot like Remake in that when you hit L1 or L2, I think it's L1. I've played it for so much time, I should know, but you get all your commands. So, like, you get your materia, your, like, strong attacks. Because materia is different in this game. There's different materia you can have. So, L1 gives you access to all your materia and moves. except like where it's not like remake, is that like time doesn't slow down. It's still like full speed, full go, and you have to kind of do it on the fly. Whereas like remake's a lot more turn based in that, because when you hit that, it slows down. You're basically taking quote unquote your turn. So
okay,
it's a faster version of the original game, and it's really fun to play. And so if you ever get a chance to play the reunion version, I think you would see a stark difference in the two. But I think the reunion version is a lot of fun to play.
It feels like more, maybe not a stark difference from what you're describing, but I do feel some definite quality of life improvements from what I'm gathering. I'll have to obviously play it to really know the difference. But that sounds awesome, though. And you were saying before the DMW is pretty much the same in this, right? Because the DMW in the original.
So,
sorry, go ahead. You go first.
No, okay. I was just gonna say, I don't know how you would classify the DMW, but I feel like sometimes the DMW gets in your way. Whereas when you get your triple, it like comes down to the middle of the screen, halts all action you're doing, and then does that move, whether it's like a healing wind or an octaslash. Like, it stops whatever you're trying to do. So if you're trying to use a command and you get your 3, it cancels it out. Whereas in Reunion, the DMW is constantly going in the top left corner, and when you get your triple, it like stashes it, and then you hit a button whenever you want to use it, so it never takes you out of the action. So it doesn't get in your way.
That's super
it's like
handy.
So if you get like an Aerith healing one, and you don't want to use it yet, you can stash it. You run the risk of losing it because it still continues to go even if you have one saved, and when you get another one, you lose the one you had. But if you're at like 1,000 health and you get taken down to like 100. And you're like, okay, now I'm going to use it. Now then you use it, get your health back, and you can keep going while it still spins in the top left. So it's actually very helpful and a very unique way of doing it. And I think what they were going for in the original game, but probably just didn't have the means of implementing.
So for the listeners who don't know what the DMW is, because we've just listed a bunch of letters. That means fucking nothing if you haven't played it. What the DMW is, it's a slot machine essentially, where you see three different reels spinning constantly, and it's filled with characters that you've met throughout your adventure. So it has Aerith, it has Genesis, it has Angeal, it has Sephiroth, it has Cloud, it has Cisne, it has Tsung. It has a lot of the main characters throughout the game, and it's constantly spinning. And there's like some element of like, it'll give you little status effects, like suddenly all your MP costs are 0. Like, it's never a negative status effect, but it's like MP costs are 0 until you get something else. AP costs are 0, and that will just happen. Kind of like, it doesn't pause the gameplay, it doesn't do anything. It just kind of, little thing will pop up and says, "Hey, AP costs 0." Like, it's pretty easy to notice, and it'll leave the notification up there so you don't forget. But what it does do is, once you get 3 of the same person on it, then you get some type of special move, like you were saying, Kolby. Now, that's super awesome that Reunion lets you stash that. That's really cool. I wish the original did that, and if it does do that, I didn't know it did that. I don't think it does, though.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. All right, cool. There's a second spinning thing to that where there are numbers spinning with it. So not only are you getting like kind of characters spinning, you're also getting numbers spinning. The numbers that spin, depending on what you get. So if you get all 7s, generally, you level up. Though I believe if you get all of the same number, you level up with that as well. If you get all of the exact same number, you level up. It's happened once, twice, but almost always it's a 7. If you get 2 of the same number, it doesn't have to be right next to each other. It could be the first and third slot. It could be the second and third. It could be the, whatever. Then whatever materia is in that slot will get upgraded. So if you have a cure materia in slot 2 and 2 2s come up, it will then level up that materia 1 level. And there's a whole other mechanic which we'll touch on in a moment called materia fusion, which allows you to take materia and merge it together, and you can put items into it. I didn't tinker a whole lot with it because I ended up not really needing it all that much, but that is an option that lets you customize the gameplay, and you can really do a lot of cool things with it. Here's one of the things, like, because normally I have more fun facts in the beginning, but the reason I stopped myself is because almost all of my fun facts are related to this fucking DMW thing.
Please do tell.
Like I said, The new battle system was created to be more action focused. So they wanted, with the DMW, they wanted to make it truly random. I was trying to figure out, like, am I missing something? Am I not understanding this game? No, the DMW is 100% random. It is pure RNG. There are ways that you can manipulate it, but by and large, you have very little control over what the DMW actually does. There is an internal experience counter behind the scenes. So the more you fight enemies and the more enemies you take out and the more quote unquote experience you gain, you will then tilt that DMW to your favor to have you level up or do extra things with it. But by and large, it's out of your hands. So
that's fascinating.
I have a quote from the interview. Here's the quote from an interview about the DMW. Well, it was an interview and they talked about the DMW. The concept came from us wanting to have an uncontrollable twist of fate as a core element of the game. So you might fight a boss character twice, and the first time you lose, but the second time you win because the DMW powers you up. The DMW is very random, but it can give you effects like restoring all of your HP. We really want to use luck to make things exciting. End quote. I forget who actually said that. I'm going to have to look up the article now because I feel bad not having the credit for the quote.
Twist of fate, huh? They've been on this since 2007.
Dude, I thought the exact same thing. The moment I read Twist of Fate, I'm like, Nomura's been on his bullshit for this since Crisis Core with the whole fighting against fates and like that kind of thing. I was so surprised to see that.
God, I've never heard that. That is something.
It was with the series producer Yoshinori Kitase.
I was gonna say Kitase probably said that because Kitase, like, it's either him and Nojima who like write the books and all that stuff. And I have one of the books. There is a new FF7 book that just came out. I think Nojima wrote it. It's awesome. But Twist of Fate, huh? They've really been on this.
Yep.
They've been on this bullshit for a while.
I was so surprised to read that. I was like, really? Twist of Fate? After all the stuff with Fate in a remake, I was like, oh, so this has been brewing underneath the surface for over a decade.
Man. I was gonna say they've been dying to tell a story where Zack survives past the events of
which I think would be bad. I think that would ruin the whole thing. But the other thing about the DMW is that it was inspired, and this is a very Japanese thing, inspired by pachinko. Another quote from Kitase. Awesome. Both I and Mr. Nomura are very enthusiastic about pachinko, and we were discussing if there was any element of it that we could put into the game. End quote. So, yeah, that was... The DMW is just pure random, and some people love it, some people hate it. I understand why people dislike it. I don't hate it, and the only reason I don't hate it is because this is something that could have been so easy to fuck up. It could have been so easy to not work out. When your level up system is completely tied to RNG. Random. You can't control how you level up. You don't know how much experience you need to get to the next level. You can't control how your materia levels up. I would assume by using materia more, it does another internal EXP thing to kind of tilt probably the DMW in your favor. But by and large, you have an RPG that you cannot control how you level up in. That could have been disastrous. And I understand why people don't like it, but I'm honestly surprised how well this works. What are your thoughts?
God, all those God, thank you for that fun fact. I'd never heard any of that stuff before. That's wild, but I can only speak to Reunion, obviously, and I do like see the argument of this is literally a role-playing game. The whole point is to level up and beat the final boss. So how does it make sense to not be able to quote-unquote level up by your own means? But the DMW never, I feel like it never gets in your way from that standpoint. Because they say it's random, but they have to have like favorable outcomes.
Well, that's what the behind the scenes.
It can't hurt you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the DMW can't hurt you in combat. Like it only helps when you get all your stuff. So, and that thing spins like crazy. Like I think probably spins like 20, 25 times. Like even in the smallest encounter. So, I think that it's unique for sure, and it definitely adds a level of uniqueness to this game that is kind of like perfect Final Fantasy VII, honestly, because that original game took so many swings with different stuff, with like mini games and the story it was trying to tell, and like the more adult themes and all that stuff. So like this whole series is kind of about taking swings. Why not take another one here with the DMW? And again, it wasn't a complete disaster, which I think is the best thing you can say about it.
Yeah, and I would say it's not. I would say it's very Final Fantasy as opposed to being very Final Fantasy VII. You're right. It's this whole series is about taking swings. I think you nailed it on the head with that. Like it, Final Fantasy, for all of its warts, for all of its highs and lows, it takes a swing and doesn't always work. Like if you like think about it with remake, most people just wanted a faithful remake of the original game, but with updated graphics. And they didn't do that. And as much as I have gripes about how the story ends in remake, I think they did a fucking fantastic job with it. Like they really could have. They took a swing on it. They took a swing because they could have done the same thing.
And we wouldn't be talking about it if it was a faithful remake.
Exactly. And I'm happy it wasn't just remade or a remaster. It was a full-on
quote-unquote
remake. Yeah. They really did a cool job with it. I gotta pull myself back, otherwise I'll keep talking about remake. But yeah, so with Crisis Core, the DMW is a very interesting system. There's a lot of interesting other mechanics in this game too, in terms of how combat works. The dodge roll is super handy. I think there's a block, but I forgot the button for it, and I never used it once.
It was R1 on the controller. Was there an R1 on the PSP?
No, because the PSP only has one R and one L button. There's no R1 or R1. But I could have sworn there was a block button. Then. But actually, it's funny, like because the PSP also, you can't control the camera in combat at all. So,
oh god, that sounds like a nightmare.
It would be if you didn't automatically target enemies. Like your character, you have no true control over which enemies you target except like which you are closest to. So you kind of have a little bit, like if you run over to an enemy. But honestly, most of the bosses in this game could be like remedied as simple as you do one attack, do a dodge roll behind it, so now you're at its weak spot, and you just beat the shit out of it from behind it. Like yeah. I never used materia like at all. Like none of the enemies really require it. You can brute force your way through it. There is one of the DMWs, which is Cisne's. It increases your luck. So even if you're not behind the enemy,
is the best.
Yeah, because now all of a sudden you're critting every freaking hit. It's wonderful. Some of the materia also will affect your underlying stats. So like materia, depending on how much you level it up or how you use the materia fusion system, which we mentioned before, which once again, there's not much more to explain to that. I don't know all the intricacies unless you know something I don't about it, Kolby, but you just put two materias together. You can add an item in there for some flavor and change some of the outcomes, but it's just you tinker with it and you see what you get, you know?
Yeah, that's literally it. Like, Reunion is the same thing. But all the material you can get from Fusion, you can find in-game if you play enough missions and stuff like that. Yep. So I used it just to get it quicker, and I did a lot of missions at first, so I had better items to help me get there. So in early game stuff, I would say it's helpful, and you should definitely experiment with it. But by the time you get to like mid-game or end-game, you're not going to be using it at all.
And speaking of those missions, well, actually, sorry, I almost sidetracked myself. To real quick wrap up the materia talk. When you equip materia, some of the materia will give you pluses to different stats. So there's I had a plus like 3 to magic on a lot of my materia. I also specifically searched for materia that gave me plus to attack. There was one that I found, it's a power move, I think it was called. It was like power attack. It was a mastered version of it that I just found, though I did use a strategy guide to find it. I forget exactly where. It wasn't like hard to get. Like you didn't have to do anything crazy fancy, but it gave me a plus 15 to my attack power. So it made like everything like plus 15 is huge. Most of the pluses you get are like 2 or 3. So this is 5 times that. So it made the rest of the game like a cakewalk. But yeah, so you can get different perks and benefits to your stats through materia, and by using the materia fusion, you can find some other cool shit to like get better materia to give you better stats and that kind of stuff. But what I like about how the game also does their kind of like leveling up, the way they kind of balance out the randomness of the DMW system and them like finding the materia, because it's all random for the most part unless you have a specific treasure chest you find stuff in, are the missions. And you mentioned the missions before, Kolby. The missions are there to serve as your way to grind, to level up, because there are random battles that as you progress through the levels, and you can run around and do all that stuff, but there's going to be areas where you can't get to random battles, but there is a save point. So if you're at a spot where you don't want to backtrack to all of the areas and fight random enemies, you can just do missions. You can just at the save point do missions over. It doesn't matter if you're right before the final boss in basically the underbelly of a town that's about to has like a few huge underground cave system and looks like there's like fucking like gates to hell or some shit. It doesn't matter. You can do some missions right from that save point, right before that entrance, which is kind of cool. What are your thoughts on the missions, though, man? Like, were there any that really stuck out to you? Did you like how they were implemented, or did you have some issues with it?
Missions I think are great. Like for exactly the reason you said, it takes away the needless running around, because the game's not that big in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. So there's not a lot of sections where you can just run around and grind. So it takes away that aspect of it, which I like. There's just so many of them. Like
they're very varied.
I think I did like 110.
Holy shit!
Reunion, and I'm only 48% done with them. Like I still over half of them left. So I'm not going to be 100% that game to its completion, obviously, but you get a lot of helpful stuff from the missions.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of helpful items, so you don't even need to do all of them to reap the benefits from it, which I like. So, I don't have much to say on it because I think it's perfect for what it's trying to do, which is give you an easy way to grind and get some levels and play with the DMW a little bit, while giving you a challenge and just playing the game more. So I have no problems with it. There's some fun little side stories. Like I don't know if the Yuffie stuff is in the original one, but there's like a whole side mission stuff with Yuffie and whole side mission stuff with Yuffie and Reunion and the original by the sounds of it. So you have some of that. There's I think there's stuff with Hojo, which is cool. So like FF7 lore hounds are gonna obviously maximize all that, but yeah, I think they're a plus for the game for sure.
I'm with you. They add a lot of context to the world you're in too. Like those missions, they're literally side missions. In other side quests and side missions in Final Fantasy, you have to like go to some town on some continent you don't remember that you visited before and find a quest chain there and travel it along. No. It's all listed out for you in a nice list form. So, and it's built into the game's world. Like a lot of times I would hate that if it didn't feel like it kind of belonged in the game's world, but you're a Shinra soldier operative. Like you're given a list of missions that you have to but that you can complete. That feels very natural to the world. If suddenly the original Final Fantasy VII, you just saw a list of side quests, that wouldn't be nearly as interesting. It would kind of defeat the purpose of like exploration in the game. This one, you like you said, man, there's not a lot of space, not a lot of places to explore. So you kind of substitute that with this mission list, and you get to meet a very young Yuffie. Also, you're mentioned with the FF7 lore hounds, there's a lot of lore in this, like all about the war against Wutai. You get to see a lot of stuff with that's where Yuffie kind of ties in. You also get to fight Hojo experiments and stuff like that, Turk missions. There's a lot of cool stuff. You also get this isn't one of the missions, but you also get a little taste of Vincent in the basement of Nibelheim, but he doesn't do much with it.
Because Zack can like acknowledge him. He's like, who the hell's like sleeping in his coffin? And he kind of just like moves on, but it's almost like a cameo without being a cameo. It's cool.
It's a good little nod to it.
I think Kate Sith's in the game at some point too. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff you can find in there.
Wow, I did not know that.
In the missions, he might be. He's definitely in the DMW in Reunion.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I got unlocked everyone in my DMW. There's also, I've totally forgotten, thinking of people to unlock in the DMW, there are summons you can get, which are also randomly summoned by the DMW. And it's a random thing upon another random thing, because it's something I didn't bring up, but you did touch on, man, with the DMW in the PSP version, is that when you get the 3 faces of the same person. 3 Clouds, 3 Sephiroths, 3 Genesis, whatever.
Genocide.
You can look. The game will completely pause, and it will then it'll make you watch a cutscene. You can skip some of them, but some of them you can't. And it's really obnoxious. And I don't know what the purpose of it. I guess it's supposed to reflect on your memories of like the experiences you've had with these people. It's like you'd be in the middle. Is it supposed to represent like you're in the middle of combat and be like, oh man, I remember this great time with Cisne when we were riding in a helicopter. Here, give me some luck, Cisne. And then it cuts back. I don't know. It felt super weird. I understand doing it in like an emotional like. I understand
like at the end,
yeah, or like an emotional point in the movie or in the game, excuse me, but for just random encounters in the middle of like not even like a boss fight, you're just fighting some random soldier in the middle of a field, and all of a sudden, like Sung comes in with a helicopter strike, and I'm like, you don't need to show me this every time. It actually kind of reminds me of a major issue old Final Fantasy games have, where they would, with the summons, you would have to watch this animation of the summon, which as a kid I fucking loved because it was this beautiful CG animation I never saw before. Nothing ever looked that good to me. But now as an adult, I'm like, this is like 15 seconds of just me watching the same thing over and over and over again. If I want to use this summon more than like 2 times, I'm going to lose my mind because I'm going to have to waste so much time just watching an animation. And this kind of reminds me of like a more updated take of that bad idea of just watching the same animations over and over and over again just to do a move that you already know is going to happen. I don't know. I thought that was weird. What do you think, though?
On first playthrough, I think it's cool for the player to see these scenes that we can't experience because the game has to tell the story and like move on constantly. Which in Reunion, you can skip all the scenes. Even if you haven't watched them before, you can skip past them. Same with summon animations. You can skip past them, which summon animations are amazing. They look amazing. So good in both versions. They're really good. So you can skip past them in both of those senses, which is nice. But I always love the extra content with the characters. Like, give me some more humanity to Sephiroth, to Cisne, a new character we've never seen, to Sung, who we don't get a lot of in the base 7, to Angeal, who is a major character, obviously, but has limited screen time even in that role. So it's cool in that regard, but I do see your point of like Zack fighting like Shinra soldiers and him like having like a PTSD like flashback, like a certain mission he had. Like, and, like the idea of that's kind of funny, like as he's getting shot at from all kinds of different angles. But it's definitely for the player, not so much the game. And so from that perspective, I enjoyed them, but I understand, since you couldn't skip them in the original game, how that would really slow things down.
I mean, well, you can skip a lot of them. There's a few where, like, how can I put this? If you see like a moving image, it's kind of like a faded border, and it's supposed to be like a flashback, you can skip those. But if it comes up in like these little like single picture vignettes of like, it's sometimes like 3 of them, 4 of them, or 5 of them, you can't skip those. You just see like a brum 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 just popping up on screen all over the place.
Yeah, those are in Reunion too.
I can't. I understand kind of like the purpose of it. It makes it feel kind of like, oh, something special's happening. But when that same special thing happens all the time, it no longer feels special, and it feels like I'm just wasting time.
Exactly.
We say all that because the summons, it'll do a little animation and then it'll switch reels over to a summon reel, and you'll see the heads of all the different summons that some of the ones that you've obtained, some of the ones that you haven't, which can be obnoxious too.
Missions, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, some of them are through story. I think Ifrit is through story, but like Bahamut, you get through missions and stuff like that. You have to defeat the summon first in order to obtain the materia for it, which I don't have, which is cool. But it still can be annoying sometimes because it'll take you to that secondary reel. Like, the first one will have the 3 slots, or the 3 reels for the slot machine, and then little animation with an X or whatever pops up and has the new slot machine for the summons. Sometimes you don't get all 3 heads, though, because it is still somewhat random. So it'll do the whole animation only to be like, just kidding, you don't actually get to summon anything. You got like Ifrit, Bahamut. So sorry, no summon, even though we wasted your time with that animation. But whatever. But I think we've covered enough about the combat here. We've discussed materia fusion, the DMW, how combat works in game, the differences between Reunion and that. So let's move on, man, and talk about the visuals, the art style, and the world and setting that they've built for us here, that they made for us here in Crisis Core. I loved this when I first played it because it felt like a much more fleshed out version of the Final Fantasy VII I had in my head. Because, you know, when I first played this... What, sorry?
That's what I was going to ask you. Like, because where you keep talking about my unique perspective, I was gonna come from the perspective of like, okay, you've played original 97 FF7. Obviously, it was a landmark at the time, but 10 years later, you get this game where everything's much more drawn to life. So, like, what was that like? Playing it now and playing it back then.
Yeah, it was really cool to see it for the first time. Like, I remember seeing like the inside of Shinra's building. I'm like, oh, this is what, you know, Shinra looks like on the inside, because you saw it a little bit in Final Fantasy VII. I mean, you saw a large portion of it, but when it's that top-down kind of hand-drawn background type of thing, it was a lot different seeing it in person, which was really cool. And also getting to explore around Midgar, like, as a fully 3D thing. Like, you saw streets, and you could go to, like, the Loveless Street where Aerith walks out in the iconic intro and stuff like that. I thought that was just really cool to see. And I also am a sucker for, like, in games where you have this big, vast world that you once knew, Final Fantasy VII, and they focus on a very granular part of it, which is the office life of Shinra. I don't know why that fascinated me so much, but it was something that was really cool, and it kind of made the world feel that much more fleshed out when you kind of get more of an idea of how Shinra works as like a bureaucracy and as a company type of thing. Regardless of how evil they are, of course they are evil, but it was still really cool to see. And then in terms of like the story, just seeing Sephiroth as a human as opposed to this kind of ambivalent evil, you know, like just something you couldn't quite put your finger on. He was just this entity that you were following, you were tracking around the map. Because as much as you heard the backstory in the original game of what happens here, the Nibelheim incident and everything, you don't really get a full picture of Sephiroth. He only has a couple lines of him not being insane, and then he's insane. You know, like there's not really a whole lot of development given to Sephiroth pre his mental breakdown. So that was really cool to see Sephiroth as a person, and you know, he's friends with Angeal and Genesis, and they talk about that relationship that they have with each other and this bond of being the first of the 3 soldier first classes and everything. It was really cool to see. And so experiencing it back when I first played it, I don't think I got as much out of it as I did this time. I think starting the podcast, this is going to get a little sentimental, but like starting the podcast, one of my favorite things that has happened from that, besides meeting cool people like yourself and all of our friends and our like podcasting group and everything, like, it's the fact that I feel like I'm better equipped at looking at a game and being able to articulate what I like and don't like about it, and being able to, and more importantly, in all honesty, appreciate a game for different aspects. I'm not saying even games I hate, right? Even games I dislike, I find ways that I can appreciate it for some other specific way. It's a semi-bit of a hot take that I've said 1,000 times and I won't rehash it again. I'm not a big fan of Dark Souls, but you know what I appreciate every time I play it? I appreciate, or every time I try to play it, and even though I still don't enjoy it, I just appreciate the amount of attention to detail to like the world design, like how everything is interconnected and how the levels weave in and out of each other. I thought that was really fun and interesting. And even though I don't enjoy the game all that much, I still find things to appreciate about it. And so playing this again, you know, over a decade plus since I last tried it, it was fun to appreciate it for like looking at the battle system, looking at the DMW system and being like, okay, I didn't understand this the first time. I just kind of played through it, but now as an adult, I can analyze and be like, okay, that's really what I thought it was, just pure random. Like I thought I was missing something. Turns out I wasn't. But I get to appreciate games in a completely different way, in a different context, in a different light. So, the big thing for me experiencing this game after Final Fantasy VII, when it first came out, I was blown away by the graphics, blown away by the visuals. Honestly, this looks better than some PS2 games, which is just crazy to think about on the original PSP. It looks fantastic. And then now playing it, in 2023 and beating it, the episode will be out in 24, but playing it and recording this in 2023, it makes me love it even more. It was such a fun experience to kind of see the world of Final Fantasy VII fully flesh out. And it's funny, even with Remake out now and being able to experience Final Fantasy VII from that lens, it didn't take away the experience for me. It still felt fleshed out in this, which I thought was really cool. But what are your thoughts on it? How did you feel playing through this world and how it represents it visually? I understand they updated the graphics for Reunion, but still, the question still stands.
Yeah, no, I the reason I wanted to get really specific and ask you the question I did is because I'm coming at it from, I played Remake, which is just visual, basically movie, cinematic masterpiece. Mm-hmm. And then, not to say it's a downgrade or anything like that, but basically play an overhauled PSP game in 2022 when I played it. So, but again, there's new areas in this game that you don't go to in 7 or Remake, like Benora, like other places. Benora's the big one for plot reasons that you go to. But yeah, there's different places, there's different characters. Gungaga's another one that you can go to that's a lot more fleshed out in Crisis Core than it is in base 7. So again, it feels unique. It definitely feels unique from 7 and Remake, because Crisis Core is just I think the game's just it leans into the more weird of Final Fantasy, of Final Fantasy VII. Story-wise, visually, characters with wings and flying around and talking about dreams and poetry.
Very Nomura. Very Nomura.
Yeah, very Nomura. Leans into the weird, but again, is unique and different in that way. So, just looking at the game visually, Reunion's stunning. The character models are great. Even the PSP cinematic cutscenes, they're beautiful.
They look amazing for 2008, dude. Holy shit.
So well done. They look better than Advent Children does, for sure. So maybe not saying much, but given that one's supposed to be a movie and the other's basically a DS game, high praise. So yeah, I love watching the cinematic stuff. I loved watching the character models interact with each other. I love them interacting with the world. I have nothing but positive things to say. Reunion's beautiful, and I'm sure at the time in 2007, Crisis Core was the cream of the crop in terms of PSP games visually.
It looked fantastic. And now the game did come out right around when the PS3 was out as well. And there was talks, they asked the developers in the one interview I read, did you ever consider putting it on the PS3 or the PS2 as opposed to the PSP? And they said, well, the PS3, when they first started development for this game, they didn't even have a PS3 dev kit. So PS3 was out the window from the get-go. PS2, they thought about it, but they wanted to experiment with the PSP hardware because it was so new at the time. They wanted to see what they could do with it.
And they needed a big seller, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. And so, I'm sure Sony was super appreciative of that, because that's the thing that it bums me out about Sony's handhelds, is that they start off with some really cool original games, and then they never follow up with it. They start off strong with some really cool ideas and don't allow it to grow. The Vita was the same way. The Vita started off with Gravity Rush, an original Uncharted game, Tearaway. There was even an original Killzone game. All of them were bangers. They were really good. And I covered the Uncharted game earlier this year. It's a really good beginning, and the PSP did similar stuff. You had Daxter, you had Secret Agent Clank, you had and Daxter is fine. I'm not saying it's a great game, but it's an original title for the system. Yeah. There's also Little Big Planet on Vita, the PSP. There is obviously Crisis Core. There was a Kingdom Hearts game, Birth by Sleep. One of the most important games in the Kingdom Hearts storyline is on this system. So they do stuff like this where they'll have these monumental, I shouldn't say monumental, but like super interesting and unique original games for their handheld, and then they just fucking do nothing with the handheld after that. But anyway, that's a different pedestal. That's a different soapbox.
They could have easily made Dirge of Cerberus a PSP game. Just watching a little bit I've watched of that, which could have given some life.
I still need to play. I own that game. It's somewhere back there. I haven't touched it yet. Really,
I've never played it. I've watched it. I haven't heard good things. So if you want to watch it,
not a lot of people like it, from my understanding. But yeah, so the thing that I guess, and then we'll wrap up this section, and then we'll go into the story, and then we'll kind of put up that spoiler wall for the story here. The visuals of this game are, I think, some of the best PS2 era visuals, and I mean that as a compliment. Like, I think this is more from my perspective because the PS2 came out when I was in like junior high. So like, well, no, hold on, I was technically 11 years old when the PS2 came out in 2000. When I had my formative years with it, I was like 13 or 14, right? Like junior high, like middle school era, which is like prime gaming age. Like that's the shit that you remember the most. So PS2 era has a really soft spot in my heart because that's what I played a lot of growing up then. And so this game, just everything about it screams PS2 era game, and I mean that as a nostalgic compliment. The music choices, like the music in this is fantastic. The score is amazing. I will say though, some of the songs can be a little bit odd and a little bit misplaced in terms of when they use them.
Yeah, for sure. But the big notes hit, and that's what's most important.
Yeah, exactly. But like the visuals, like how Zack looks, how Cloud looks, how Genesis and Angeal and Sephiroth, they all look, it just looks, it wraps me in a warm, cozy blanket of nostalgia, and I can't exactly tell you why it does that, except for the fact that I like PS2 era visuals, but it looks good. Like, it's a good-looking PS2 era game. And while obviously graphics have improved greatly, as we saw with Reunion, as we see with Remake, I enjoy the visuals. I will say one last thing in terms of the presentation before we get to our story. The voice acting is not great. I don't know if it's better in Reunion, but in the original, it's pretty rough. It's not. There's a lot of moments, specifically. Now it actually makes a lot of sense. The with Gact as Genesis, it feels very stale. It feels like the amount of times, like the amount of fucking times Genesis recites that stupid Loveless, like stage or play. I couldn't think of the word, for Christ's sake.
Loveless, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, I just want him to shut up. He's talking about the gift of the goddess. That was going to be the tagline that I was going to go with before. We received the gift of the goddess or something like that. I can't stand, I don't even want to know what the whole game focuses a lot of his like story arc revolves around his obsession with this stupid play and him quoting it. I can't tell you what the story of the play is. I just can't. I have no idea what it is, but it pisses me off how often he talks about it, and the voice acting for it doesn't do it any service. Voice acting, I would say, in terms of overall like visual, audio, all that other stuff, it's the lowest point of all of it. I would actually put the soundtrack as like pretty much on par with the visuals. Like, I love both the soundtrack and the visuals. Voice acting, I cannot stand.
Yeah, so I think for Reunion they have just better voice actors. Not taking away from 2007's. Like, I'm sure, like, voice acting wasn't nearly as big a field as it is now. It probably didn't have as much emphasis as it does now in video games. But that said, so one of my fun facts I was going to do is Caleb Pierce, the voice of Zack, had to do an interview with like one of the big FF7 channels on YouTube, and he was talking about like the process for this game, and they would listen to the 2007 lines and try to do the exact same like voice projections as the 2007 lines with his voice.
Ooh.
So, which sounds unnatural, because I remember very specifically when Zack's new voice actor was getting dragged because apparently Zack's voice actor for Crisis Core, who was good, but was kind of overshadowed. Like, he didn't take my breath away or anything, but he was getting dragged for his performances, and I'm just like, yeah, well, listening to people who honestly probably weren't even voice actors, they were just actors doing voices, and try to do that, whereas like voice acting is now much more of a niche field that feels like a setting up for failure. So yeah, the voice acting definitely is kind of like subpar. It's better in Reunion, but like my biggest low point, you already hit on it, was like using certain musical cues at times where it didn't match the emotion of the scene.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of was my biggest like disconnect. But like I alluded to earlier, when it hits. Like the high points are high, like truly high. So that overshadows it. But yeah, that's really all I got from like a voice acting standpoint. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like it starts and ends with me, but that's just my 2 cents on it.
No, I'm with you on that, but we won't harp on it because there are actors who put their effort into this, and I'm not trying to denigrate them. They're better than I am at it, but like in all honesty, I think you nailed it. It's direction. Like if they were using the original versions as the basis for Reunion, that explains a lot. Like you said, setting him up for failure. That's not a great way. And also, it's kind of insulting to the modern voice actors, like to the current crop, because it's like, here, don't put any of your flair into it. Go buy this one from 15 years ago. We want you to use that as your like baseline, which I think is just kind of like, I don't know, it kind of takes away some of the bite of their performance, that they can't be a little bit more themselves,
Yeah, and to put a bow on all this, another fun fact I guess I have, in a very pivotal moment in the game when Zack is on the run and he runs into Sisane in Reunion, to go back to like, hey, they just put the source code into Unreal Engine and just made a video game out of it. Zack's original voice actor has a line that they forgot to change in Reunion. At this very pivotal moment, like Zack's voice completely changes and sounds like it's from like 2007. That's because it's the exact same voice line from the 2007 PSP
Wow.
game.
That that actually, Square, what are you doing?
I thought it was kind of like he had good spirits about the whole thing, like when they like brought to his attention on Twitter, but like I was like, oh god, like you guys really were just kind of like, let's just not change anything.
That's wild. That is wild. But all right, let's dive into the story and the themes of this game, shall we?
Let's try to.
We are now at the spoiler wall section of the show, listeners. So if you have not played this game and you do not want it to be spoiled, then I would suggest coming back, giving it a pause. Don't stop it entirely. Come back, please finish listening, but pause the episode. Go play this. It's actually not that long of a game. You can beat it in like 15 hours. If you do if you do optional side quests, then it's going to take obviously longer. But I beat it in 15 hours, and I did about like 20 or 30 of those missions. Like it does, maybe even less. Like I didn't do a lot, but so it's worth playing through. I will say that. So, let's go into the story now. Let's do this. So we already know, like I said before, we already know the final outcome of this. We know that Zack is going to die trying to get Cloud to Midgar. Something that was not well broadcast in the original game, something that you actually have to really track down in the original game, is how Zack and Cloud kind of come to know each other. And you find out, like, the big thing is that after the Nibelheim incident, where Sephiroth goes fucking nuts and determines he's going to be the savior of the planet, or try to be the ruler of the planet, I should say, not the savior, and Cloud kills him after after Sephiroth injures Zack and Tifa. Cloud kills Sephiroth, and they both get picked up by Hojo. Hojo does experiments on both Zack and Cloud for 4 years. Well, Zack is a soldier first class, so he's strong as hell. Cloud is just a regular Shinra dude. He's just a normal, he's not in soldier, he is a soldier. And because of that, he pretty much gets severe Mako poisoning. And he is incapacitated for the entire time that Zack, is trying to help him, like trying to rescue him. Both him and Zack are trying to get out of Nibelheim. So that's the ending, and that's all stuff from Final Fantasy VII. And Zack dies in the way out, but all the stuff leading up to that we don't know much about. So you learn a lot about how Genesis and Angeal are soldier first classes. They're friends with Zack, and they go on missions to end the war with Wutai, only to have one of them go rogue, which is Genesis. And Genesis, you find out that both Genesis and in turn a little bit later Angeal were experimented on by Hojo when they were babies. I think when they were kids. Yeah. Do you remember, was it when they were kids or was it like when they were adults? I thought it was when they were kids.
I think Genesis is a quote unquote failure of what Sephiroth was supposed to be. They have Project S and Project G. I forget which one's which. And was
G
it Hojo
is Genesis,
or
S is
was it Hojo or Hollander that experimented on them when they were babies?
It was Hollander, sorry. Hojo experimented on Cloud and Zack, but it was Hollander, Sephiroth. You're right. Yeah.
Hojo did Sephiroth, Zack, and Cloud, and Hollander, I think, did Genesis and Angeal. Yeah,
I think so, yeah. Well, so...
Because Hollander's the one, he's like, I did this to you, I can fix it.
Yes. So what basically all it was is that for those who don't know Final 7 lore, and this is stuff that I don't think is well broadcast in the original game. So Jenova was a calamity that fell from the sky, and calamity is the most accurate description of it. It's never broadcast in the game, but you find out, or broadcasted well, I should say, that Jenova Shinra believed to be an ancient, one of the ancient civilizations, the Cetra as they call them. And turns out Genova's not that. She's an alien. She's from outside. She's a calamity that fell from the sky. And so when they mistakenly take her cells and inject them into humans thinking they can recreate the Cetra again in some way, shape, or form, it does not. It just ends up turning people into monsters, which is a big theme of this game as well. Being like, what makes you human when you are, when stuff has been done to you type of thing. And each experiment with Genesis and Angeal and Sephiroth, all of them were experimented on with Jenova cells, but done in different ways. I believe Genesis and Angeal, it was like done like while they were in Genesis might have been like post birth, Angeal might have been like in the womb, and then like Sephiroth, it was like the mother was given in Jenova cells type of thing. I believe it was something like that. That each, I forget do you remember at all, or am I completely off with this?
Sephiroth's mom was injected with Jenova cells while Sephiroth was in the womb.
Yes,
and like Jenova. Like, so as Sephiroth's like merging into a person or a baby, he's merging with Genova's cells simultaneously. Mm-hmm. And that's what gives him his supernatural abilities. And when you get Jenova cells injected into you, you kind of just become an avatar for Jenova, because Genova's not dead necessarily.
Yes.
Like Jenova can take from original 7, I think Jenova like took the images of like dead loved ones of the Cetra. And like that's how she was able to like basically almost drive them extinct until they sealed Jenova away. But when you get Jenova cells injected into you, you lose control of your will, and that's basically the entire arc of Cloud Strife in Final Fantasy VII. But for this game, Angeal and Genesis were, and we'll get into this later, quote unquote, failed experiments, and Sephiroth's like this perfect basically super soldier that stems from this. So they're trying to create super soldiers essentially, and Cetra, like recreate the Cetra.
Exactly. And Genesis and Angeal, the reason they are failed is because they start degradation as they call it, and basically it just makes them turn gray and they grow wings. Eventually they'll die.
Yeah, I guess.
It's a really goofy thing. I'm like, why are you growing wings if you're degrading? There's no rhyme or reason to that. That's all Nomura bullshit. And honestly, it looks really fucking cool. Makes no sense in real life, but it looks really fucking cool, and that's Nomura in a nutshell.
And like the most iconic character to have a wing is Sephiroth, and he never has one in Crisis Core. He only ever has one in Advent Children.
Dude, I didn't even think about that. You're spot on. You're
like the one-winged angel is like the only character to not get a wing in Crisis Core. It makes no sense.
I didn't even notice that.
Like fucking Hollander and Lazard end up getting wings somehow, and like the one-winged angel, like the dude, the guy that you built this entire idea around, does not get it in Crisis Core.
Oh, and they, I guess one character we forgot to mention is Lazard, who is the head of Soldier. He goes rogue eventually as well. And the reason I find it even more funny that he gets a wing is that they even reverse engineer his bullshit even more so, in the sense that all of a sudden I guess I don't understand if he was an experiment too, but somehow he got turned into a clone of Genesis after Genesis started degrading. So Genesis does get killed. Not Genesis. I'm sorry, Angeal. Angeal does get killed some point in the story, which we're not going to go through beat by beat, but we'll get to the overall broad strokes in a moment. And he, for some reason, hold on, what does exactly like Wikipedia even say about it? Because it makes no fucking sense.
Lazard takes Angeal's cells and becomes like an Angeal. They call them copies. He becomes an Angeal copy. Because Angeal's big thing is he can project his cells into other living matter. So the big one is he projects himself into like a dog that protects Aerith at the church. So for good intention, but that's like what makes him a quote unquote monster. Genesis is that he has the big black wing and it can't, and is like degrading. That's what makes him a quote unquote monster. So Hollander ends up injecting himself with Genesis cells, and Lazard ends up injecting himself with Angeal cells. And since they're failed and degrading, those two are also failed and degrading. And like Hollander has like this little tiny black wing, and Lazard gets these like big white wings. And this is the weird of the story that makes no sense whatsoever. And like Zack is like, what is going on? Like Zack is like the perfect embodiment of the player too, which makes him so likable. He's like, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, all this, like, cells and poetry and all this, like, bullshit. I'm just trying to get my friend to Midgar. So, this is the weird of the story. But, yeah, like, it just kind of dawned on me that, like, dude, like, the one-winged angel, like, the whole, like, thing that you went for here, he's, like, the only one. The only one the wing actually looks good on, you don't put it on.
And I think what's interesting about the story is that if you look at it in terms of broad strokes, it actually is a really good, solid story. You know, like Zack is trying to become a higher level soldier first class. He looks up to his mentor Angeal, who is a soldier first class who values his honor and embrace your dreams and you know fight for your honor as a soldier.
Original wielder of the Buster Sword.
Original wielder of the Buster Sword. I like the story arc. I even like the fact that you find out that one of the soldier first classes, Genesis, goes rogue because he finds out how he was experimented on, that he's going to die because of those experimentations, and he's trying to find a way to fix it because Shinra will obviously try to kill him for the failed experiment. So I like all of that setup. I like the fact that he somewhat convinces Angeal to go rogue too, because Angeal's suffering from the same thing too. So it makes sense why all of this is happening. But then all this bullshit with wings and projecting like Angeal and Genesis cells onto other people and injecting things into people, like that, the setup is enough for the character development. You don't need all this extra stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The general outline of the story is good. Like, Soldier goes rogue because he finds out he's dying and is trying to find a cure, but like he's obviously going about it the wrong way, so we need to try to stop him. Pretty good. Okay, like not bad. Okay, what goes in between all that is just like where you kind of lose me a little bit.
Know what this honestly reminds me of? And it's the same criticism that I usually offer up to like George Lucas stuff. Once again, to tie it to the Star Wars prequels a little bit, I still enjoy this more than the Star Wars prequels, but like Star Wars prequels, their biggest flaw, and don't worry, for some reason, if any of y'all don't know the storyline of prequels, I'm not going to spoil any of it. But the big issue with the prequels is that I think George Lucas is really great at setting up plot points and setting up a good outline. Like if you look at the plot points of the prequels and how things go, I actually think it's really good. But it's the writing in between all those plot points that makes it kind of blah. So with this, it's the same thing. Like, the way they set up the inciting incident of Genesis going rogue because he's dying from this degradation. cool idea. And also it plays into the story of Cloud being a Sephiroth clone or being experimented on. It ties in with the whole experimentation machine.
It ties the whole thing together.
And Angeal. Exactly.
But they do a horrible job of telling you that's what's happening because Angeal's just because Genesis is just talking about this poem the whole time, and Angeal's just talking about honor and integrity. Like, they do a horrible job of explaining it out for you, which is why Zack being like, I don't know what you're talking about, like, kind of fits.
And at least with Angeal, you can see the confliction in how he's like speaking to Zack, where he feels like he's a monster, so he has to leave, and Zack's trying to tell him that he's not. Regardless of what he is and what he happened to him, it doesn't make him a monster. He can choose to be one or not. And that is supposed to be the whole two sides of the coin with this thing. Genesis is supposed to be the one to like see that conflict and give into it and be like, well, I'm a monster now, fuck it. And Angeal's going to be like, I don't know what to do, and ultimately ends up deciding to not, I'm not going to live my life as a monster. I'm going to live my life as I once was. And I know I'm going to die from this, but I'm not going to succumb to being the monster that everyone thinks I am, type of thing. None of that's broadcast in the story, though. None of it. It's because, like you said, dude, like Genesis just talks in this whole loveless, gift of the goddess, holding a fucking brown or like a blue apple or whatever. A dumb apple, yeah. It has all of that, but it's all hidden behind this like garbage script from Genesis, and even I would even say just some of the convoluted Nomura stuff. Like I said, Nomura's fingerprints are all over this. Regardless if he was the writer of this or like the head of the story, he was
the creative director. He was in there, baby. He was getting his hands in the mud.
I mean, he's the creative director, I want to say, for Reunion, right? But the original director was Hajime Tabata, who worked. I mean, he was at the Square for a while. What else did Tabata do? Actually, before I double check it real quick.
He has a couple roles.
He was. I mean, he did Before Crisis, which actually this game, I should have said this up top, was going to be a port of Before Crisis before they determined they couldn't do it for one reason or another. But yeah, Tabata is still with the company. He did a game that came out in 2021 called the Pegasus Dream Tour, and it's for iOS and Android. I have no idea what that is, but that's
what that means.
Oh, and sorry, he no longer works at Square Enix. He's now the CEO of a company called JP Games. So I'm assuming he's with JP Games right now, and that's one of their games. Anyway, but with the story though, really cool overall themes of, when are you a byproduct of what's been done to you? Yes and no, but how you react to it can really determine how, like,
is what makes you human. Yeah,
is what makes you human, exactly. And I love that theme, and I love that idea. It's just buried in like so much nonsense, and because you can even see it with Zack, where Zack, he gets experimented on by Hojo for 4 years, and when he comes out of it, thankfully he meets like he's still the same, and I like his relationship specifically with Angeal, because Angeal's reaction to becoming a quote unquote monster kind of shows to Zack what you can do when you're kind of confronted with this type of situation, type of thing. And like, he could have become a monster just like Angeal and like left Cloud to die, but that's not it. Cloud's his buddy. He's not leaving his friends behind. So in general, I really like the themes of this. There's so much stuff in between. Sorry, it looks like you were going to say something.
Oh no, I was going to say, like, even though we have all this convoluted stuff with the story that we both agree could have been done better, at the core of it's a character that you really like and is really well written, which definitely helps the flow. And I wish they would have leaned into this with Sephiroth more. Like, I wish Sephiroth was in the game a little bit more, because they do a great job of humanizing him and giving him the moments of him being like a really cool dude, and like someone who, yeah, is cold, is callous, is kind of like not above it all, but just not getting a lot emotionally out of him. But seeing that he does kind of become insane, and seeing how Zack has seen two of his, not, I would consider Genesis his friend, but seeing his mentor and then this other dude he was associated with fall into that same insanity, I think they could have leaned into that a little bit more and given Sephiroth some more context. Because another thing I hate was Genesis appearing at the Nibelheim reactor telling Sephiroth how he was born. Like, that took away a lot of the original, like, Sephiroth learning on his own too, which I did not like, because like the Sephiroth in the library, like reading like a maniac for 7 days is what causes him to snap, not this dude who's degrading and his gray hair falling out of the sky, telling him how he was born. Which, how does he even know that? I don't know, because Hollander was the one who experimented on Sephiroth, but that's neither here nor there. So it's just another small change, like we were talking about with Last Order, like how Tifa seeing Cloud kind of like was not a big deal, but a big deal. The same thing with Genesis telling Sephiroth of his origin. Like, not a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but kind of a big deal to me because I really care about that story.
I would say, like, Tifa's thing is a lot more, is a bit of a bigger issue because it really affects how Tifa reacts to Cloud as the Final Fantasy VII goes on. With this, I think it's a poor choice. I'm with you. I don't think it has, in terms of how it affects the story at large throughout what Final Fantasy VII ended up doing, I don't think it has too much of an effect, but it's still, I'm 100% with you. It makes Sephiroth's turn not as interesting. And I'm with you as well. I think that they could have fleshed him out a little bit more. They do touch on it a little bit with him in the sense that he has always felt different from everyone else. So when he does learn,
because he can't be the donor for Genesis when he gets hurt in the simulation, which is So that's a good job of making him more like, why can't I be the donor? Because that scene is like where the whole budget went to, that fight between the three of them on the Junon reactor, which was sick. But
it's a great scene.
Yeah, that's kind of like the beginning of Genesis's snap, is that he gets injured and it never heals, which causes him to look into the degradation thing. And then Sephiroth's like, why can't I be the one to help him? And that's when they find out about all the experiments. So cool in that regard, but again, never seen to fruition. And you think that, and like if you just played Crisis Core and never played FF7, you would think Sephiroth like avoids the whole insane thing because Genesis asks for his cells and he's like, nah, dude, like fuck off, like we're not cool. And like you would think like, oh, like he's fine, and then the next scene is him burning the town down. So like, it's, again, I don't love that Genesis was there. I wish they would have went differently with that, but I get that making your Japanese J-pop star your protagonist, you kind of have to give him his moments. So him being with Sephiroth, I'm sure
they give him a lot of moments.
Yeah, him being with the most iconic, one of the most iconic characters in all of Final Fantasy, I'm sure was preordained.
And I don't have an issue necessarily with the relationship, but I'm with you with the Mako reactor 100%. I don't think Genesis needed to be there, but there's so many other, like you had a full on fight scene with Sephiroth and him. Like you didn't need that scene. That's just, it feels like Genesis was almost in it a little too much. Like for being the final villain, he should be in it a lot. No issue with that. But it almost feels like he was in it too much. And if you're going to put a character like that, or any character in it that often, they need to do something every time. Every time you see him, for the most part, it's just him quoting that fucking play.
That's what I was going to say. Like, it's not that he was in it too much, it's just that when he just didn't add enough substance to the plot of the story.
You nailed it. That's it 100%. He doesn't add enough substance for every time he's in it. And his character arc should be enough substance. But the problem is, like, every scene that he shows up in, it's nothing. There's just nothing there for it. Just it irks me.
Well, let's talk about a positive of the story. I think. What do you think of Cissnei and the addition of her?
I thought she was interesting. It was a weird. I liked her. I was confused by her though. Is she meant to be a romantic interest to Zack or just a friend? Because it felt like she kind of liked him a little bit, but he was. It was
definitely on the border for sure.
Yeah, because the whole relationship with Zack and Aerith, I really enjoyed. Because I mean that was also preordained in the game, in the original Final Fantasy VII. But with Cissnei, I thought it was kind of cool. I don't know, the whole thing with the Turks. I like that they gave the Turks more character in this, but they still felt like side characters. Like you didn't really. Actually, no, you need to include them because of how the game ends, where they purposely try to misdirect Shinra and let Zack and Cloud escape.
I really like that. I wish there was more on it, though. like them trying to save them versus hunt them down. I wish there was more of an explanation and reasoning behind that.
Agreed, and I really wish it was more earned. And what I mean by that is, like, I don't get the friendship between the Turks and Zack. I understand that's what they were trying to do, but in terms of how they presented it, they don't feel like good friends. They just feel like we like each other.
Buddies.
We work with each other. We're work friends, and we like each other. Like, good work friends, not just like, oh, I like this guy. He's a cool dude. No. Like, friends. They're actually friends. But it doesn't feel like they're good enough friends to be like, I'm going to jeopardize my career for this dude, you know? And so it didn't, I don't have an issue with the addition of Cisne or how the Turks interact in general with Zack, but it just felt a little underbaked. What are your thoughts though?
For a character that only appears in Crisis Core and nothing else to this point in 7 compilation, which I think is shocking, I like Cisne. Zack has a thing with, I guess, underage girls, which we can explore another time. But when it comes to romantic partners, we'll skip different times.
Oh yeah, isn't Aerith like? Wait, hold on. What age is Aerith
16,
in Final Fantasy?
She's 16 in Final 7. Crisis Core. No, in Crisis Core she's 16. Because Zack's like 21, I want to say, and then 4 years he's making like 24, 25. Aerith's 20 at that point, so it's a little less sketch, but when they first meet each other, I don't think the relationship's too far gone to declare anything to break Good Samaritan law. So I think Zack's safe in that regard. But back to Cisne. She could have added a lot more character to the Turks, I think. And I say could have because I don't think she's in the story enough to do so. I also think that Reno and Rude could have been done better too. And they're not in the game a lot, but because they show up like in 7 and 7, because in 7 and in 7 remake, the Turks are primarily antagonistic. You're fighting them a lot, whereas here you're working alongside them a lot more. So I thought it would have been cool to explore that a little bit. I get that we have a story we need to tell, but the reasoning for why they were working together with Sung and Cisne and Reno and Rude, I don't know. I wish it was drawn out a little bit more, other than like Zack saving Cisne from a couple copies once, and next thing you know, they're best friends. And Cisne's like telling Sung she lost the target, even though she's standing right in front of him, giving her keys to a motorcycle. Like it all felt very rushed in that regard. But I think Cisne had a lot of potential. Honestly, she could have been a really cool twist to the story.
I'm with you on that. And in general, I think the characters of this were like, there's so many cool ideas with the characters. We already talked about NGL and Genesis. With the Turks, like there's so many cool ideas how the Turks and Zack interact and how they have a pretty important role for the end of the game too, or the end of the story too. But like it's a lot of great setups and not a lot of great execution. Like it's good execution on most of it. Some of it's meh, but most of it's good. I would say the spots where they actually nail great execution is specifically I honestly the first couple moments when Genesis goes rogue, I like all that. Like it's very mysterious. You don't know what's going on. They do a good job at kind of not subverting your expectations, but like keeping that under wraps. Like doing a good job of not making you think, not letting you figure out where the story's going to go. That's what I was trying to say. And this other time is Zack's death scene. I think they nail Zack's death scene really, really well. There's a couple overdone things too, but what I love about Zack's death, the way they do it, is that they make you play it. It's not just a cutscene.
It's the best.
It is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. You start off with like there is a army of like hundreds of soldiers, and you can take, I mean, if you really want to, you can see how long you can last, see how many soldiers you can take out. I didn't even bother doing that because I know what this scene's supposed to be. You're supposed to die there. You're supposed to eventually get overwhelmed by soldiers and you can't fight them anymore. And even if you do that, I got down to 1 HP. They don't kill you, even if they hit you a whole bunch of times. So they have that, and then there's like a final like fight with like 3 more dudes, and Zack, he can't defend himself. He's beaten down. You can't dodge. Your attacks are slow. Like they it's a really good moment in the game because instead of just showing you what's happened to Zack, you get to feel it in your core because you're playing through it as Zack beaten down. It's phenomenal.
I completely agree. It's the shining moment of the game, and even before playing it, you probably knew it was going to be. But this, is it over the top anime? Absolutely. Does that make it less or more? No, I think it had to be, because that's the moment that is, like I said before, and like we've talked about all day. That moment right there happens literally days before 7 begins, like days before, like in the grand scheme of things. Like Cloud jumping off the train with Avalanche, like Zack died like a week before that. So like it's quick, and it's supposed to be this big moment, and that's the moment that starts what would be 7 and all that. So Zack's death scene was, and like when I talked about like the shining moments are truly high. The Price of Freedom playing was just like the perfect song for that moment. It was like, it was somber, like you knew it was going to happen, but you still wanted to fight through it and fight fate, if you will, even though you couldn't in that moment. So everything about that I thought was perfect. I have nothing more to add. The scene before it with him staring down, the cinematic scene of him staring down the soldiers and saying embrace your dreams and going at them, everything about if you didn't like the game as a whole, it was all leading to that moment, and I feel like everyone who played that moment felt something, and that's the biggest takeaway from the entire experience for me.
Yeah, you nailed it. And the whole embrace your dreams thing, it's very much like a mantra throughout the game, because that's what Angeal taught Zack. Zack relays that to the soldier recruits, and that's how Zack goes out, by embracing. Like, it's kind of a weird thing to say right before you die, but his dream is just to live free, and that's
and be a hero.
Be a hero. He wants to be a hero, and that's exactly how he goes out. It's very Saving Private Ryan-esque with the whole like, earn this. I don't know. Have you ever seen Saving Private Ryan?
Yes. Yeah, I know exactly.
Okay. It's very Saving Private Ryan-esque with how it ends, and it just, I don't know. It's a moment that could have been either done a little bit too over the top, and I think it goes over the top just a little bit too much in terms of like some of the like how drawn out
shooting the helicopter, shooting the missiles at you.
Yeah, but like, it's not drawn out too much. Like it's drawn out too much, but it doesn't ruin it, is what I'm trying to say. Like, it didn't draw it out so much that I'm like, oh my god, just fucking end this game already, which Nomura would do. No, that is a very Nomura thing, to drag something out longer than it
even
needs
after
to be.
Zack like falls and is talking to Cloud, there's still so much cinematic shit left. Like, Cloud stumbles to Midgar, Angeal flies down from, I guess, heaven, if there is a heaven in this game. He flies down and like picks up Zack, and Zack's like, "Would you say I became a hero?" There's a lot of cinematic. There's like good 5 minutes left after Zack dies, which I'm not saying is too much, but like, also saying is too much. Like, you could kind of just had Zack. Zack could have closed his eyes and died, and that could have been the game, and that could have been it. Like, we all know what happens after that. But
yeah,
the other thing too, with you talking about it being over the top, this is my only gripe with the scene from a story standpoint. You're telling me the Turks didn't see all that shit going down? Like, they couldn't intervene at some point to hop in there?
Yeah.
Because like they were flying the helicopter trying to find them minutes before that all happened. So you're telling me, and like Midgar's not that far off. I mean, you couldn't tell me that you couldn't see the helicopter shooting like M40s and missiles at this one dude. Like, you couldn't intervene to save him. So
there's a giant explosions happening outside the city, and like, you're not going to investigate that shit. Like, it is kind of odd. You're right.
And Cloud survives all of it somehow.
Right? Well, he's away from it at the time. Like, Zack always puts him away from the fight somehow. I don't know.
Yeah.
Actually, he was pretty close on that one, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. Like, given the thousands of troops that are there, you tell me not one of them saw the comatose vegetable like in soldier gear, like a couple feet away. So it's again like things that don't matter. I'm picking at here. Like, the scene as a whole was fantastic. I have no like big complaints about it. It was the perfect moment for that game.
And I think I think that's a good spot to start wrapping up this episode, man. Like, we've broken down, not everything, obviously. There, if we really wanted to, I feel like I would need a detailed like list of everything that we could go into in terms of the story. But like, I feel like that was a really good discussion on how this game kind of works. It's a game. Honestly, I think the way we ended is a perfect description of the game as a whole. It's a game that goes a little bit over the top, but it's not quite over the top enough to be like, meh, it's bad. It's like, this is a good game that just goes a little bit too far, but I still enjoy it, even though it went a little bit too far, you know?
Yeah. It's a game that at times loses its footing and like forgets what it is with some of the plots and characters and moments like that. But at the end of the day, it produced like shit, maybe the most likable character in the 7 franchise. It produced an iconic moment that ultimately created Remake, because the big unknown journey now is Zack survived that event. So you have your traditional FF7 path with the Remake crew, and your unknown journey now is Zack living and making it back. And that only happened because of the moment that
Wait, did that happen in Remake?
Zack survives it in Remake.
Oh, I did not know that. Don't worry, I'm not worried. I'm not mad about a spoiler thing. That does. So he survives it in Remake.
So when they kill Fate at the end of Remake, it changes Zack's. Zack survives that in an alternate timeline, and now because everyone's pissed off about how they're going to change things in Rebirth, and they're ultimately pissed off that Aerith might not die. The unknown journey they keep talking about is what's happening with Zack. I still think everything's going to happen as it does in Base 7 with our current party, but the unknown journey is now Zack making it back to Midgard, because that is truly unknown. We don't know what happens after he does, because he's never done it before. So that's my theory on it. But that only happened because of this moment in Crisis Core.
No, do you see Zack survive? Like, is it like official that you see him in Reunion or Remake or whatever, like after his supposed death?
So after you kill Fate and like beat Sephiroth at the like edge of creation, the next scene is Zack surviving the events.
I don't remember. I beat Remake too. I forgot. Son of a bitch. Maybe I don't remember that at all. I beat Remake.
Like the last scene of that game is Zack taking Cloud to Midgard, like in another time, somewhere else in the timeline.
So, okay.
That
goddamn Nomura and his timelines and
that unknown journey they keep talking about is Zack. That's Zack.
Okay. That would make sense, because it is unknown, because that's not the story that we've
and they wouldn't have done that had he not been as popular a character, and that's because of this game that all happens. So I'm thankful for it in that regard. And Reunion's I'm not gonna say fantastic, but it was fun to play. I enjoyed it. So if you get a chance to play that, it's on basically everything: Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch. So not hard to find.
Wait, is Reunion on Switch?
It is.
God damn! I could have played Reunion. I should have done more research on that. I just played, because I owned the PSP, so I was like, all right, I'll just play it. It
came out on PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, Switch, Xbox One, and Series X.
Son of a bitch. I could actually play it on... Oh, I can play it on my PS4 as well. Okay, I'm dumb. Anyway, I'll get it eventually. At the end of the episode, we're almost... I mean, it's going to be a little bit of a chunk for a coughing spree I had. So listeners, if I sound a little bit off this episode, it's because I've been getting over a cold this past week. But we're almost 2 hours into recording. So it only took that long for me to realize that I could have gotten it on a bunch of other systems and played a different version or played the remake version of the game. But anyway, I think one last thing I want to say before we do our plugs and everything is I really think we cannot overstate, and you kind of bringing it up makes me realize I didn't really talk about it enough during the course of this episode. Zack really is a great character, man. Like he has such an interesting character arc. He is consistently likable throughout the entire game, where other than his questionable choice in dating ages, but he in general is like, he genuinely wants what's best for the people around him and what's best for the world, at least in his eyes. He is trying to maintain a sense of honor, and I think a lot of that stems back from Angeal. I think Angeal is a much more interesting character than the game gives him credit for, because he's very stoic throughout the game, but because of him being Zack's mentor, he sets up Zack's kind of trajectory for the type of person he is throughout the game and the hero he wants to be. And that's why one of Zack's final line is embrace your dreams. That's something that Angeal taught him and stuff like that. It's a really, this game is filled with great characters, not always executed perfectly, and the combat is hit or miss with some people, but I think overall this game's actually worth checking out, even if you don't beat it, just as a curiosity. Just give it a shot, because it's a type of game that I haven't seen another game play exactly like this, which I say as a compliment. It's a really interesting battle system. The storyline is fun, and it's a tough thing for a game developer to create a game where you already know the ending, where you have to match up with something that was pre-existing. Red Dead 2 kind of similarly had this issue, though I think they handled it a little bit. I don't want to say they took an easy way out, but they kind of just like, well, it was a very segmented story. This story in Crisis Core leads directly into the story of Final 7. Like, you cannot have the events of Final Fantasy VII without everything that happens in this game. And by that, I think they did a fantastic job of bridging the gap and expanding out the world and universe in this game, and sometimes in good ways, or sometimes in bad ways. With the whole gift of the goddess stuff, the overly written lines from Genesis, and like some of the cheesy plot choices of like people getting wings and all that other shit. But where it shines is when it shines, man, it really shines. I think it fleshes out the world in a great way, and I really enjoyed my time with it. So, Kolby, throwing it over to you, my friend. What are your final thoughts on the game?
My final thoughts ultimately are it gets off to a bit of a slower start, but the final half stretch of that game is truly what Final Fantasy VII fans are going to love, and that it sticks the landing. Because like you said, it's not always the cleanest, it's not always the best in terms of characters, story, all that stuff, but when it has to stick the landing, it sticks the landing. And like you said, the events of 7 and even now Remake can't happen without this game and the events of Crisis Core. So the original game did a lot for its time. Reunion is a great remaster of it. For those who are interested in Remake and want to get into it, highly suggest playing Reunion. And I've already mentioned it, but the biggest thing this game did was it created a character that everyone has genuine interest in. Everyone loves. Everyone is so excited. Gets his own piece of the pie in of the Remake collection and trilogy. So overall, I'm not big on scoring games or giving games numbers or as a measurement. Like I don't like doing that. So I enjoyed playing it. If anything, if you enjoy either what you said in the 2007 version or what I said in the 2022 version, if either that sounds interesting to you, highly suggest checking it out. Would not bat an eye either way with either version you choose, because as the source code said, they're the exact same.
What's cool about one thing I want to comment on too is like when I play a game, sometimes, especially when it's like a game that I'm kind of forcing myself to play for the show because of Patreon poll topic or whatever, a lot of times I will end up looking up a strategy guide to be like, all right, how many chapters do I have left? I don't necessarily use the strategy guide to like play the game for me.
A reference point for where
just to kind of, I did that with this, but never in excess. Like some games, like Epic Mickey, I guess is a little bit of a foreshadow for my thoughts of that. I was ready to be done that game so soon. It was like, it just was way too unnecessarily long. This, honestly, I kind of still want to play it. Like, I think that's the best compliment I can give something. And like I said, I'm not saying this is a great game. I think it's just fun. Like, it's the battle system, for as RNG heavy as it is, it's still really fun. Like, I can't wrap my description around it well. It's just fun, and so I want to go back and play it again, even though I don't really have the time to. So I think that's the highest compliment I can give.
Yeah, and and Reunion and the original game being only 10-12 hours is, I think, a great compliment. I'd rather a game be done earlier than overstay its welcome. I'm sure you're the same way. So Crisis Core definitely falls into that boat. So if that's something that you're interested in, and like you said, you can play it during lunch breaks. So you can. It really is an easy get in, get out kind of game. And for what, I know it doesn't always sound like it means it's the best product, but it's pretty dang good given that circumstance.
Agreed. So let's wrap up this. I was going to say turkey shoot. That means fucking nothing. I don't know what I'm going with this. Let's wrap up this episode, man. Thank you so much for joining me, Kolby. This was a lot of fun. I knew this was going to be a longer episode, and I'm so happy it was, because this was a great conversation about a really fun game. So for my listeners out there, I know your show has been on hiatus for a little bit, but is there any social media you'd like to promote? You want to promote your podcast? Shout it all out, my friend. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I'll talk about the podcast. Me and my co-host Tyler, we co-host a podcast called Switch It Up, which is primarily an all things Nintendo podcast. But like you said, at the time of recording, we haven't had an episode since July, which was our big Tears of the Kingdom, like basically a thesis. We did 3 episodes on Tears of the Kingdom that are all like over 2 hours long. So a lot of work went into that. But Tyler and I are at the points in our life where, podcasting is just not something we have the luxury of doing. This is the first podcast I've done in 5 months. So again, thank you for having me on. Sorry if I was a little rusty, but hopefully the show's back. Hopefully the show's back soon. I love doing it. I love doing it with Tyler. We're lifelong best friends. So getting a chance to talk to him about video games is always something I look forward to, and we have a chance of doing it. So Switch It Up podcast on all your available podcast networks. That's something you're interested in. Please check it out, and patiently await our return, because by no means is the show over. We're just having trouble finding time doing it right now. So having the chance to come on other shows like this one, it means a lot. So thank you again for having me. I had a great time talking about this game with you.
Dude, thank you for coming on. Thank you for setting aside 2 hours to discuss Crisis Core. Hopefully it doesn't put you in a crisis for tomorrow morning when you have to get up for work. So, for myself, as usual, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, Twitch, at Still Loading Pod on all of those. If you want to support the show, you can give it a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use, because it makes me feel warm and fuzzy, and I like feeling warm and fuzzy, and it helps more people find the show, which is always a plus. If you want to support the show monetarily, you can go to patreon.com/stillloadingpod for $1 a month. You get all the episodes like this one a couple days earlier with better audio quality, as well as access to quarterly patron voting polls, or voting to help pick other episodes like this one for us to talk about. This was a patron chosen game. So if you want to help out and guide the direction of the show, you can join Patreon for as little as $1 and be able to vote in quarterly polls and help pick topics to future games and other topics to talk about. For $4 a month, you'll get everything I mentioned prior: the voting rights, the early access, the better audio quality, plus you'll get 2 mini bonus episodes every month, usually about 15 to 20 minutes each, but there's 2 of them every month, and all of random topics. I do music episodes, I do retro magazine reviews. I've been doing a whole thing on the Gamer 5 portable system, which is 220 in one handheld game system. Evolve, all the games on that thing are of immaculate quality. Such seminal titles like Curly Monkey and Curly Monkey 2, and games that we've definitely all heard of. Only the best. A lot of I don't know if I've said this recently. I don't know when this episode is going to be coming out compared to all the others, but there is a lot of games devoted to you playing as a panda doing various Olympic events, like the long jump and the high jump and different swimming events. It's something. So that's all over at the $4 level. Those bonus episodes just exploring all that stuff. It sounds like it's
Kung Fu Panda before Kung Fu Panda.
I would that you're really insulting Kung Fu Panda.
Well, listen, maybe this is the blueprint for it. I'm sorry. Like, for $4 a month, you can find out, though.
You can find out, yeah. And then for $5 a month, you'll get everything I mentioned prior, plus access to Still Bonding, which is my monthly James Bond podcast where me and a bunch of friends bond over 007. Each one of those episodes is minimum 2.5 hours long. The most recent one, the time we were recording this, just dropped, and that was The Living Daylights, and it was just, and I kid you not, 40 seconds shy of 4 hours. So every episode, that's I think the 15th one we've done, that is 15 plus movies, all 2.5 hours long, and that's a lot of content for you for only $5. It's a cup of coffee. So if you want to support me over there, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. So yeah, that is all I got for you on this episode of Still Loading. Kolby, thank you once again for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much again for having me. It was a blast. Anytime you want to talk anything, I'm down.
Dude, I'll have to have you back on, whether it's Final Fantasy VII or otherwise. We'll get you back on for some other stuff. So yeah, that's all the time I got for you. Thank you all so much for listening, and I will see you all next time.